The lawyer cleared his throat and read the will again. My sister Natasha smirked as she declared ownership of our deceased father's entire rental empire. 15 properties worth millions. I sat there supposedly left with nothing, watching her celebrate with our stepmother Rebecca. But here's what they didn't know. I had been quietly investigating our family finances for months. The documents hidden in my purse would destroy everything they thought they knew about inheritance, loyalty, and blood money. Hey everyone watching from around the world. Before we dive into this incredible family betrayal story, smash that like button. If you're ready for some serious karma, and don't forget to subscribe, because trust me, you'll want to see how this revenge unfolds. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I love connecting with viewers globally. Now let's get into this wild ride of family deception. 3 months before that devastating family meeting, I was Maya Richardson, a 32-year-old forensic accountant, living what I thought was a perfectly normal life in Portland, Oregon. I had always been the responsible daughter, the one who visited Dad every Sunday, helped with his rental property paperwork, and maintained relationships with tenants when he grew too ill to handle everything himself. My father, Harold Richardson, had built his real estate empire from nothing. Starting with a single duplex in 1978, he worked tirelessly for 4 decades to accumulate 15 rental properties across 3 Oregon counties. Growing up, I watched him sacrifice weekends and holidays to maintain these buildings, always promising that someday his hard work would benefit his family. Natasha, my younger sister by 4 years, had taken a different path. She moved to Los Angeles after college, pursuing an acting career that never quite materialized. Instead, she married wealthy men, divorced them strategically, and lived off settlements while barely maintaining contact with our family. When Dad remarried Rebecca 5 years ago, Natasha suddenly became interested in family again. Rebecca was 23 years younger than Dad, a former real estate agent who swooped into his life during his loneliness after Mom's death. She was beautiful, charming, and incredibly manipulative. I watched her slowly isolate Dad from his longtime friends and business partners, always with honey-sweet explanations that somehow made sense in the moment. The discovery that changed everything happened on a rainy Tuesday evening in March. Dad had asked me to help organize his financial documents because his arthritis made handling paperwork increasingly difficult. As I sorted through bank statements in his home office, I noticed something strange. Regular transfers of $50,000 were leaving his main business account every month, going to an account I didn't recognize. Initially, I assumed these might be loan payments or investment withdrawals. Dad had always been private about the intricate details of his financial strategies. However, my forensic accounting instincts kicked in when I noticed the timing of these transfers coincided perfectly with Rebecca's expensive purchases. A new BMW designer handbags and luxury vacations that seemed beyond what Dad would typically approve. Digging deeper into the bank statements, I discovered a pattern of financial manipulation that made my blood run cold. Rebecca had convinced Dad to add her name to several property deeds, claiming it was for estate planning purposes. She had also gained access to his primary business checking account, supposedly to help with bills during his illness. But the most shocking revelation came when I cross-referenced property tax records with Dad's financial statements. 3 of his most valuable rental properties had been quietly transferred into Rebecca's name over the past 18 months. The transactions were technically legal, but the timing suggested they occurred when Dad was heavily medicated following his heart surgery. I spent weeks gathering evidence, photographing documents, and creating a comprehensive timeline of financial irregularities. Every piece of evidence pointed to a systematic scheme designed to transfer Dad's wealth away from his daughters and into Rebecca's control. The monthly transfers alone totaled over $1 million during the past 2 years. The most heartbreaking discovery was a series of text messages between Rebecca and Natasha that I found on an old phone Dad had asked me to reset. The messages revealed their partnership in manipulating Dad's estate planning. Natasha was promised ownership of the rental properties in exchange for supporting Rebecca's relationship with Dad and staying silent about the financial transfers. Their plan was elegant in its cruelty. Rebecca would maintain control over liquid assets, while Natasha inherited the rental properties, effectively cutting me out of my father's legacy entirely. They had even discussed how to handle my inevitable objections with Natasha, suggesting that my controlling personality made me unsuitable for property management responsibilities. Reading those messages felt like being punched in the stomach repeatedly. My own sister, the person who had shared countless childhood memories and family traditions, was actively working to steal my inheritance. The betrayal cut deeper than any romantic relationship ending or friendship dissolution I had ever experienced. I realized that every recent interaction with my family had been carefully orchestrated theater. Rebecca's concerned questions about my finances, Natasha's sudden interest in visiting Dad more frequently, their shared suggestions that I was working too hard and needed to step back from helping Dad with business matters. Everything had been calculated manipulation. The evidence was overwhelming, but I knew confronting them directly would be futile. They had already demonstrated their willingness to lie and manipulate someone they claimed to love. Instead, I began developing a strategy that would expose their scheme and protect Dad's true wishes for his estate. I also started noticing subtle signs that Dad might be aware something was wrong. He would ask repeated questions about property values and rental income, as if trying to reconcile numbers that no longer made sense. Sometimes he would stare at Rebecca with confusion when she made expensive purchases, but his medication and declining health made it difficult for him to process complex financial information. The weight of this knowledge was crushing. I was watching my father's life's work being systematically stolen by people he trusted, and I was the only person who could stop it. The pressure of keeping this secret while gathering evidence and planning my response was overwhelming, but I knew that one chance to expose the truth might be all I would get. As Dad's health continued declining, I realized time was running out. I needed to act before the estate transfer was complete, and before Dad's condition made it impossible to reverse the damage. The upcoming family meeting about Dad's will would be my opportunity to reveal everything I had discovered and fight for the justice my father deserved. The following weeks became a masterclass in covert investigation and emotional restraint. I maintained my regular visits with Dad while secretly documenting every aspect of Rebecca and Natasha's scheme. My forensic accounting background proved invaluable as I traced money movements, property transfers, and legal document modifications that painted a clear picture of systematic elder financial abuse. During my investigation, I discovered that Rebecca had been far more sophisticated than I initially realized. She had established a network of shell companies and offshore accounts to hide the stolen funds. One company, Pacific Northwest Holdings LLC, was registered to her maiden name and had received over $2 million in transfers from Dad's various business accounts. Another entity, Cascade Property Management, had been collecting rental income from 3 properties that were supposedly still owned by Dad. I also learned that Natasha's role extended beyond simply agreeing to inherit the properties. She had been actively participating in tenant harassment designed to force out long-term renters who paid below market rates. Her methods included surprise inspections, threats of eviction for minor lease violations, and deliberate delays in maintenance requests. The goal was to clear out existing tenants and raise rents substantially before transferring ownership to her name. The most disturbing revelation came when I accessed Dad's medical records through his healthcare portal, where I was listed as an emergency contact. Rebecca had been systematically increasing his medication dosages during important financial meetings. She would give him extra pain pills or anxiety medication before visits with lawyers, accountants, or real estate professionals, ensuring he was too confused to ask detailed questions or object to document signings. I documented instances where Dad had signed property transfer documents while clearly impaired. Security camera footage from his lawyer's office showed Rebecca guiding his hand during signatures and answering questions directed at him. In several cases, Dad appeared to have no memory of these meetings when I spoke with him the following day. Building my case required extreme discretion. I could not let Rebecca or Natasha suspect I was investigating their activities, so I maintained normal family interactions while gathering evidence. This meant smiling through Rebecca's fake concern about my well-being, listening to Natasha's fabricated stories about her acting career, and pretending to believe their explanations for Dad's declining involvement in property management decisions. I also began reaching out to Dad's long-term tenants, many of whom had lived in his properties for over a decade. Their stories confirmed my suspicions about the harassment campaign. Mrs. Patterson, an 80-year-old widow who had rented a 2-bedroom house for 15 years, described receiving threatening letters about lease violations she had never committed. Mr. and Mrs. Kumar, who had maintained a spotless rental for 12 years, were suddenly facing eviction for unauthorized modifications that included hanging family photos. These tenant interviews revealed another layer of the scheme. Rebecca and Natasha were not just stealing Dad's current assets, they were destroying his reputation as a fair and compassionate landlord. Dad had always prided himself on providing affordable housing to working families and seniors on fixed incomes. Seeing his legacy being twisted into a predatory rental operation was heartbreaking. As I gathered evidence, I also began consulting with elder law attorneys who specialized in financial abuse cases. Attorney Margaret Sullivan explained that while Dad's transfers to Rebecca were technically legal, the pattern of transactions combined with evidence of mental impairment during signings could potentially void many of the property transfers. However, proving elder abuse in court would require substantial evidence and testimony from medical professionals. I started secretly recording conversations with Rebecca and Natasha, using my phone to capture their discussions about property values, rental income, and future plans. During one particularly revealing conversation, Rebecca bragged about how easy it had been to convince Dad to add her name to property deeds, laughing about his confusion regarding legal documents. Natasha responded by joking about how I would completely lose it when I learned about their arrangement. The recording that sealed their fate came during a family dinner in early June. Rebecca had been drinking wine and became unusually talkative about her financial strategies. She explained to Natasha how she had researched Dad's medication schedule to time important conversations when his judgment was most impaired. She even demonstrated how she would redirect his attention during lawyer meetings by asking irrelevant questions about family memories while important documents were being signed. During this same conversation, Natasha revealed her plans to sell most of the rental properties immediately after inheritance, estimating she could liquidate the entire portfolio for approximately $8 million within 6 months. She had already contacted several real estate investors who specialized in bulk property purchases. Her goal was to take the money and move to Europe, completely abandoning the rental business Dad had spent his life building. I also discovered that Rebecca had been forging Dad's signature on various documents for over a year. A handwriting analysis I commissioned confirmed that at least 12 property-related documents bore signatures that were not written by Dad. This evidence alone was sufficient to challenge most of the recent property transfers and financial arrangements. The emotional toll of this investigation was overwhelming. I was watching my father being systematically robbed by people he loved and trusted, while being powerless to stop it without risking the entire case. There were moments when I wanted to confront them immediately, especially when I saw Dad struggling to understand why his rental income had decreased so dramatically. But I knew that premature action would only give them time to hide evidence and create alternative explanations for their behavior. Instead, I focused on building an ironclad case that would not only expose their crimes, but also ensure complete restitution of stolen assets. I wanted justice to be swift, comprehensive, and undeniable. By late June, I had assembled over 300 pages of evidence documenting financial fraud, elder abuse, and property theft. Bank records, property transfer documents, recorded conversations, tenant testimonies, medical records, and handwriting analysis all pointed to a coordinated scheme to steal Dad's entire estate. The family meeting was scheduled for July 15th, supposedly to discuss Dad's will and estate planning. Rebecca had suggested this meeting, claiming it would help ensure everyone understood their future responsibilities. I knew this was actually their opportunity to formalize the property transfers and present their arrangement as Dad's official wishes. I decided this meeting would be the perfect venue to reveal everything I had discovered and begin the process of reclaiming Dad's stolen legacy. July approached like an approaching storm, and I knew the family meeting would be my only chance to execute the perfect counterattack. However, I realized I could not face Rebecca and Natasha alone. Their manipulation had been so systematic and well-planned that I needed allies who could help me navigate the legal and emotional complexities of what was about to unfold. My first ally came from an unexpected source. Detective Maria Santos from the Oregon Elder Abuse Unit had been investigating similar cases across the state. When I contacted her office with my evidence, she immediately recognized the sophisticated nature of the financial scheme I had uncovered. Detective Santos explained that Rebecca and Natasha's operation matched patterns she had seen in other elder financial abuse cases, particularly the use of shell companies and the timing of property transfers during medical treatments. Detective Santos assigned 2 officers to work with me in preparing for the confrontation. They helped me understand how to present evidence in a way that would be most effective for potential criminal charges. They also explained my rights and protections under Oregon's elder abuse laws, which included provisions for recovering stolen assets and pursuing criminal prosecution. I also reached out to Dr. Patricia Williams' dad's primary care physician, who had been treating him for 5 years. When I showed her the evidence of medication manipulation around important financial meetings, she was horrified. Dr. Williams confirmed that Rebecca had been requesting increased dosages of Dad's anxiety and pain medications, always with seemingly reasonable explanations about his comfort and stress levels. Dr. Williams agreed to review Dad's medical records and provide a professional assessment of his mental capacity during the periods when major financial decisions were made. Her preliminary review indicated that Dad had been significantly overmedicated during at least 6 occasions when important property transfer documents were signed. This medical testimony would be crucial for challenging the legality of those transactions. The most powerful ally emerged from Dad's longtime business relationships. Frank Morrison had been Dad's accountant for over 20 years and had been gradually pushed out of Dad's financial management by Rebecca. When I approached Frank with my evidence, he revealed that he had been suspicious of the recent changes in Dad's financial patterns, but had been told by Rebecca that Dad no longer wanted his services. Frank provided historical financial records that showed the dramatic changes in Dad's spending and investment patterns after Rebecca entered his life. He also revealed that he had been contacted by several property management companies who were confused about changes in ownership and rental payment instructions for Dad's properties. Frank had assumed these inquiries were simply administrative errors, but my evidence showed they were actually signs of the systematic property theft. I also connected with several of Dad's long-term tenants who had been targets of the harassment campaign. Mrs. Patterson, the 80-year-old widow, was particularly eager to help after learning that the threats she had received were part of a scheme to steal Dad's properties. She had kept detailed records of all communications from Rebecca and Natasha, including letters, emails, and voice messages that clearly showed their intent to force her out of her home. Mr. and Mrs. Kumar provided similar evidence along with photographs of their rental property, showing that the violations they were being accused of were either fabricated or the result of normal wear and tear that Dad had always accepted as part of long-term tenancy. Their documentation proved that Rebecca and Natasha were creating false pretenses for evictions in order to increase rental income before transferring property ownership. As the family meeting approached, I also discovered that Rebecca had been planning to accelerate the timeline for property transfers. Through Detective Santos's investigation, I learned that Rebecca had scheduled meetings with real estate lawyers for the week following our family gathering. She intended to finalize the remaining property transfers, while Dad was still legally competent enough to sign documents, but before anyone could challenge the transactions. This discovery made me realize that the family meeting was not just an opportunity to reveal the truth. It was potentially the last chance to prevent the complete theft of Dad's life work. If Rebecca succeeded in transferring the remaining properties, recovering them through legal proceedings would become much more complicated and expensive. I spent the week before the meeting preparing for every possible scenario. I printed copies of all evidence-organized bank statements chronologically and prepared summaries that would be easy for Dad to understand despite his declining health. I also arranged for Detective Santos and attorney Margaret Sullivan to be available by phone during the meeting, in case immediate legal intervention became necessary. The most challenging aspect of preparation was maintaining normal interactions with Rebecca and Natasha while knowing what they had done. Rebecca called several times to discuss dinner arrangements for after the meeting, chatting casually about Dad's favorite restaurants, as if she had not been systematically robbing him for years. Natasha sent text messages about her excitement to finally get everything sorted out, with the estate planning completely oblivious to the fact that I knew about her partnership with Rebecca. I also had to prepare Dad for what was about to happen, without revealing too much information in advance. During our Sunday visit the week before the meeting, I gently asked him questions about his property management and financial goals. His responses confirmed my suspicions that he was confused about many recent changes but had been told they were necessary for tax purposes or estate planning optimization. When I showed Dad some of the bank statements with large transfers, he stared at them with genuine confusion. He said he remembered signing some papers with Rebecca present, but could not recall agreeing to such substantial financial movements. His frustration with his own memory made it clear that he suspected something was wrong, but lacked the energy or mental clarity to investigate thoroughly. I realized that part of my role in the upcoming confrontation would be helping Dad understand what had happened to him and supporting him through the emotional trauma of learning about the betrayal. Elder financial abuse often leaves victims feeling ashamed and confused, wondering how they could have been so easily manipulated by people they trusted. The night before the family meeting, I could barely sleep. I reviewed my evidence folders one final time, practiced presenting key points clearly and calmly, and mentally prepared for the emotional explosion that would inevitably occur when Rebecca and Natasha realized their scheme had been discovered. I knew that once I revealed what I had learned, there would be no going back. Family relationships would be permanently altered, legal proceedings would consume months or years of my life, and the stress might negatively impact Dad's already declining health. But I also knew that staying silent would mean watching my father's legacy be stolen, and his memory be tarnished by people who had never earned the wealth they were taking. As I packed my evidence folders and prepared for what might be the most important day of my life, I felt a strange mixture of terror and anticipation. I was about to destroy my sister's plans and expose her crimes, but I was also about to fight for justice and protect my father's lifetime of hard work. The girl who had always been the responsible daughter was about to become the family member who refused to stay silent about injustice. The stage was set for a confrontation that would reveal the true nature of family loyalty and test whether blood relationships mean anything when millions of dollars are at stake. I was ready to learn whether Natasha would choose family or money when forced to make that decision publicly and permanently. The family meeting took place in Dad's living room on a sweltering July afternoon. Rebecca had arranged the seating, strategically positioning herself next to Dad on the couch, while Natasha sat across from me in the antique chair that had belonged to our grandmother. The irony of discussing stolen inheritance while sitting in furniture that represented genuine family legacy was not lost on me. Dad's lawyer, Thomas Mitchell, arrived precisely at 2 o'clock with a leather briefcase containing what Rebecca believed would be the finalized estate documents. Mr. Mitchell had been Dad's attorney for only 8 months, replacing the family lawyer who had handled Dad's affairs for decades. I later learned that Rebecca had orchestrated this change, claiming the previous attorney was too old-fashioned for modern estate planning needs. Rebecca began the meeting with fake warmth, thanking everyone for coming together to honor Dad's wishes and ensure family harmony. She had prepared talking points about responsibility, legacy, and the importance of keeping Dad's properties in capable hands. Natasha nodded along enthusiastically, occasionally glancing at me with what I now recognized as pity mixed with smugness. When Mr. Mitchell began reading the revised will, my heart pounded so loudly I was certain everyone could hear it. The document outlined exactly what I had discovered during my investigation. Natasha would inherit all 15 rental properties Rebecca would receive, controlling interest in Dad's financial accounts, and I would receive a modest cash settlement of $50,000, along with some personal items. Dad listened with growing confusion, frequently asking questions about properties he thought he still owned, and rental income he believed was still coming to his accounts. Rebecca would pat his arm gently and explain that these changes had been discussed many times, though Dad clearly had no memory of such conversations. The moment had arrived. I opened my first evidence folder and placed bank statements on the coffee table. Before we finalize anything, I think everyone should see what has really been happening with Dad's finances over the past 2 years. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees instantly. Rebecca's face went pale, and Natasha stopped her enthusiastic nodding. Dad leaned forward to examine the documents, his confusion deepening as he recognized account numbers, but not the transaction patterns. I methodically presented the evidence, starting with the monthly $50,000 transfers to accounts Rebecca controlled. These withdrawals total over $1 million money that was moved without Dad's knowledge while he was recovering from heart surgery. Rebecca immediately began damage control, claiming the transfers were for investment diversification that Dad had requested. But when I showed the timeline correlation between these transfers and her luxury purchases, her explanations became increasingly frantic and contradictory. Next, I revealed the property transfer documents with Dad's forged signatures. The handwriting analysis report was devastating, clearly showing that multiple property deeds bore signatures that were not written by Dad. When I played the recording of Rebecca explaining how she timed important conversations around Dad's medication schedule, the room fell completely silent. Dad's reaction was heartbreaking and powerful simultaneously. The confusion in his eyes gradually transformed into clarity as he processed the magnitude of the betrayal. "You have been stealing from me," he said quietly, staring at Rebecca with a mixture of disbelief and growing anger. Natasha tried to salvage the situation by claiming she had no knowledge of any financial manipulation, insisting she had only agreed to inherit properties that Dad wanted her to have. But when I played the recording of her joking about my reaction to their scheme and discussing her plans to immediately sell all properties, her denials crumbled. The most devastating moment came when I presented the tenant testimonies about harassment and eviction threats. Dad had always prided himself on being a compassionate landlord, and learning that his reputation was being destroyed by systematic tenant abuse brought tears to his eyes. "Mrs. Patterson has lived in that house for 15 years, he whispered. "Why would anyone threaten to evict her?" Mr. Mitchell, who had been quietly reviewing the evidence, announced that he could not proceed with the will reading given the serious allegations of fraud and elder abuse. He recommended immediate legal consultation and suggested that all recent property transfers be frozen pending investigation. Rebecca's composure finally shattered completely. She began screaming about ingratitude and family loyalty, claiming I was fabricating evidence because I was jealous of her relationship with Dad. Her accusations became increasingly wild and desperate, including claims that I had manipulated bank statements and forged recordings. Natasha's response was equally revealing. Rather than defending Rebecca or expressing shock at the evidence, she immediately began negotiating, asking if there was a way to work something out that would allow her to keep some of the properties. Her willingness to abandon Rebecca the moment their scheme was exposed showed exactly how shallow their partnership had been. The final blow came when I revealed that Detective Santos had been investigating their activities and that criminal charges were already being prepared. I had coordinated with the Elder Abuse Unit to ensure that evidence collection had been properly documented for prosecution purposes. Dad's transformation during this confrontation was remarkable. The confused, medicated man who had entered the meeting gradually became the sharp businessman who had built a rental empire through decades of hard work. As the evidence mounted, his voice grew stronger and his questions became more pointed. "How much did you steal?" he asked Rebecca directly. When she continued denying wrongdoing, he turned to the bank statements and began calculating the theft himself. $2 million, he said finally. "You stole $2 million from me while I was sick and trusted you to help." The meeting ended with Rebecca and Natasha being asked to leave Dad's house immediately. Rebecca's final act was to throw her house keys at Dad while screaming that she would destroy him in court for his accusations. Natasha left without saying goodbye to anyone already on her phone, presumably calling lawyers or family members who might support her version of events. Mr. Mitchell scheduled an emergency appointment for the following day to begin reversing the fraudulent property transfers and financial arrangements. He also recommended that Dad undergo a complete medical evaluation to document the effects of medication manipulation on his decision-making capacity during the period when the theft occurred. As Dad and I sat alone in his living room after everyone left, surrounded by evidence of the betrayal that had nearly destroyed his legacy, he took my hand and said something I will never forget. "I am sorry I doubted your concerns about Rebecca. I am proud of you for protecting our family when I could not." The criminal empire built on lies, manipulation, and elder abuse had collapsed in a single afternoon, but the work of seeking justice and recovering stolen assets was just beginning. The 24 hours following the explosive family meeting unleashed a cascade of consequences that revealed just how extensive Rebecca and Natasha's criminal network had become. Within hours of leaving Dad's house, Rebecca attempted to execute what investigators later described as a scorched earth strategy, designed to hide evidence and liquidate remaining assets before law enforcement could intervene. Detective Santos called me at 6 in the morning to report that Rebecca had withdrawn $300,000 from various accounts overnight, apparently attempting to flee the state. However, the bank's fraud prevention systems had flagged the unusual activity, freezing her accounts and triggering an automatic investigation. Her attempt to access offshore accounts from Pacific Northwest Holdings, LLC, had also been blocked pending the elder abuse investigation. More disturbing was the discovery that Rebecca had contacted several of Dad's tenants during the night, offering immediate lease terminations and cash payments if they would vacate their properties within 72 hours. Mrs. Patterson called me in tears, explaining that Rebecca had shown up at her door at 11 o'clock the previous evening, claiming Dad had died, and that all tenants needed to move out immediately for estate processing. Natasha's response was equally desperate, but more calculated. Instead of fleeing, she hired an expensive criminal defense attorney and began constructing a narrative that portrayed her as another victim of Rebecca's manipulation. Her lawyer contacted local news stations claiming that Natasha had been deceived by a master manipulator and was cooperating fully with authorities to recover her father's stolen assets. This media strategy backfired spectacularly when I provided Detective Santos with recordings that clearly showed Natasha's active participation in planning the theft. Her own voice discussing tenant harassment strategies and property liquidation plans destroyed any possibility of claiming innocent victimhood. The legal machinery moved with surprising speed once the evidence was presented to prosecutors. Elder financial abuse is a serious felony in Oregon, and the systematic nature of Rebecca and Natasha's scheme elevated their crimes to federal jurisdiction. FBI financial crimes investigators joined the case when they discovered that stolen funds had been moved across state lines through the shell company network. Dad's medical evaluation provided crucial evidence for the prosecution. Dr. Patricia Williams documented that Dad had been systematically over-medicated with anxiety and pain medications during periods when important financial decisions were made. Brain scans revealed that the combination of his heart condition medications and age-related cognitive changes had significantly impaired his judgment during the 18 months when most property transfers occurred. The handwriting analysis became even more damning when federal investigators examined additional documents from Rebecca's personal files. They discovered practice sheets where she had worked to perfect forging Dad's signature, along with notes about his medication schedules and optimal times for obtaining signatures on legal documents. Property recovery began immediately through emergency court orders that froze all recent transfers pending full investigation. Judge Patricia Coleman ruled that the evidence of fraud and elder abuse was sufficient to void any property transfers that occurred after Rebecca gained access to Dad's finances. This decision effectively returned ownership of all 15 properties to Dad's control. The tenant harassment campaign was also unraveling rapidly. Mr. and Mrs. Kumar had documented every interaction with Rebecca and Natasha, including recorded phone calls where Natasha explicitly stated that long-term tenants were bleeding money from the properties and needed to be removed to maximize investment potential. These recordings proved that the harassment was not random landlord behavior, but part of a calculated scheme to increase property values before theft. Frank Morrison, Dad's longtime accountant, emerged as a crucial witness whose testimony revealed the full scope of the financial manipulation. Frank had kept detailed records of his concerns about changes in Dad's financial patterns, including emails he had sent to Rebecca questioning unusual transactions. Rebecca's responses to these emails showed her sophisticated understanding of financial fraud techniques and her deliberate efforts to exclude professional oversight from Dad's business affairs. The offshore money trail proved to be Rebecca's most significant mistake. Federal investigators discovered that Pacific Northwest Holdings LLC was connected to similar shell companies in Nevada and Delaware, suggesting that Dad was not Rebecca's first victim. Banking records revealed that she had used identical schemes to steal money from 2 other elderly men in different states over the past 5 years. This pattern of behavior transformed Rebecca from a first-time offender into a serial predator, dramatically increasing the potential criminal penalties she faced. FBI investigators began coordinating with law enforcement in Nevada and California to investigate her previous relationships and financial activities. Natasha's cooperation with authorities proved to be largely self-serving rather than genuinely helpful. While she provided some information about Rebecca's planning and methods, she consistently minimized her own role and attempted to negotiate immunity deals that would allow her to keep some portion of the stolen properties. Her lawyers seemed unaware that I had recorded conversations proving her active participation in every aspect of the scheme. The emotional toll on Dad during this period was severe, but ultimately healing. As his medications were properly adjusted and he regained mental clarity, he experienced a range of emotions from anger to embarrassment to determination. The hardest part for him was accepting that he had been vulnerable to manipulation, but Dr. Williams helped him understand that elder financial abuse often targets successful, trusting individuals who have never encountered such sophisticated deception. Dad's transformation during the recovery process was remarkable, as legal proceedings stripped away the confusion and gaslighting he had endured for nearly 2 years. His natural business instincts and decision-making abilities returned. He began taking active control of his properties again personally, calling tenants to apologize for the harassment they had experienced and assuring them that their leases were secure. The community response was overwhelmingly supportive. Dad's tenants, many of whom had lived in his properties for over a decade, organized a letter-writing campaign to the prosecutor's office supporting full criminal prosecution of Rebecca and Natasha. Local news coverage portrayed Dad as a hardworking landlord who had been victimized by family members he trusted, generating public sympathy and support for aggressive prosecution. By the end of July, Rebecca was facing federal charges for elder abuse, wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering related to her multi-state criminal activities. Natasha faced state charges for conspiracy, elder abuse, and attempted property theft. Both were looking at substantial prison sentences and complete financial restitution requirements. The preliminary asset recovery had already returned over $1 million to Dad's accounts, with additional recovery expected as investigators traced funds through the shell company network. All 15 properties were back under Dad's legal control, with tenants assured that their housing was secure and harassment-free. The criminal empire built on family betrayal and elder abuse was completely dismantled, but the personal healing process for our family was just beginning. 6 months after that life-changing family meeting, I stood in the courthouse watching Rebecca receive her sentencing, 12 years in federal prison for elder abuse, wire fraud, and racketeering. The judge's words still echo in my mind. Your systematic exploitation of vulnerable elderly individuals represents a particularly heinous form of betrayal that strikes at the foundation of family trust and community safety. Natasha had accepted a plea bargain 3 weeks earlier, receiving 8 years in state prison in exchange for testifying against Rebecca and providing information about victims in other states. Her cooperation had been motivated entirely by self-preservation rather than genuine remorse, but it helped ensure that Rebecca faced the maximum possible penalties for her crimes. The financial recovery exceeded even our most optimistic projections. Federal investigators had traced stolen funds through multiple shell companies and offshore accounts, ultimately recovering over $2.8 million that was returned to Dad's estate. Additional civil litigation against both Rebecca and Natasha secured judgments that would prevent them from profiting from book deals, interviews, or any other attempts to monetize their criminal activities. Dad's health had improved dramatically once his medications were properly managed, and the stress of financial manipulation ended. His rental business was thriving under renewed personal attention, with tenant satisfaction at an all-time high. He had hired a property management company to handle day-to-day operations while maintaining personal relationships with long-term tenants who had become like extended family. The most unexpected blessing from this nightmare was the strengthening of relationships with people who had proven their loyalty during the crisis. Mrs. Patterson had become like a grandmother to me, often inviting Dad and me for Sunday dinners, where she shared stories about her late husband and offered wisdom about forgiveness and resilience. The Kumar family had provided emotional support throughout the legal proceedings, and their teenage children now helped Dad with property maintenance projects during school breaks. Frank Morrison had returned as Dad's accountant and financial advisor, implementing safeguards to prevent future exploitation. He established a system requiring multiple authorizations for large transactions and regular independent audits of all business activities. These protections would ensure that Dad's legacy remained secure regardless of his future health conditions. Detective Santos had become a friend and advocate, often calling to check on Dad's well-being and provide updates about Rebecca's cooperation with investigations in other states. Her work on our case had led to the arrest of Rebecca's associates in Nevada and California, potentially saving other families from similar victimization. The legal proceedings had also connected us with elder law attorney Margaret Sullivan, who had guided us through every step of the recovery process. Margaret had since become Dad's estate planning attorney, creating legally bulletproof documents that would prevent any future challenges to his wishes, while ensuring his legacy would benefit people he actually cared about. Perhaps most importantly, this experience had taught me about the difference between biological family and chosen family. While my biological sister had chosen greed over loyalty, I had discovered that real family consists of people who support you during crises, celebrate your victories, and share your values regardless of blood relationships. Dad and I had grown closer than ever before. Our Sunday visits now included honest conversations about life legacy and the importance of protecting what matters most. He often expressed pride in my courage to investigate the theft and confront family members who had betrayed his trust. Our relationship had evolved from parent-child to genuine partnership based on mutual respect and shared values. The tenant community had become our extended family. Regular barbecues and holiday gatherings brought together dozens of people whose lives had been touched by Dad's fairness and compassion as a landlord. These events reminded us that building genuine relationships and treating people with dignity creates a legacy far more valuable than any financial inheritance. I had also learned important lessons about financial vigilance and elder protection. My experience investigating Rebecca and Natasha's scheme had inspired me to volunteer with the Oregon Elder Abuse Prevention Program, helping other families recognize warning signs of financial manipulation. Speaking at community workshops about my family's experience had helped dozens of people protect their elderly relatives from similar predators. The criminal convictions had sent a powerful message throughout the legal community that elder financial abuse would be prosecuted aggressively, regardless of family relationships. Our case had become a model for how cooperation between families' law enforcement and medical professionals could successfully combat sophisticated financial crimes targeting vulnerable populations. Looking back on this journey, I realized that the most valuable thing I had gained was not the recovery of stolen money or properties, but the knowledge that I had the strength to fight for justice even when it meant destroying relationships with people I had loved. Sometimes protecting family requires standing up to family, and real loyalty means refusing to enable destructive behavior. Dad's estate planning now reflects his true wishes and values. His properties will eventually be donated to a nonprofit organization that provides affordable housing for seniors and working families. The rental income will fund scholarships for students studying elder law and social work, creating a legacy that helps protect future generations from the kind of exploitation we experienced. The most satisfying aspect of our victory was not revenge, but restoration. Dad had regained control of his life and legacy. Tenants had secure housing with a landlord who cared about their well-being, and justice had been served through proper legal channels. We had proven that criminal behavior has consequences regardless of family relationships or sophisticated planning. As I finish sharing this story, I want to ask you something that keeps me up at night sometimes. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? When those two things completely contradicted each other? How do you handle situations where protecting someone you love means standing up to other people you love? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I genuinely believe we can learn from each other's experiences with family drama and difficult decisions. If this story resonated with you or made you think about your own family relationships, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about justice, family dynamics, and life lessons learned through difficult experiences. Share this video with anyone who might benefit from hearing about how ordinary people can fight back against manipulation and fraud, even when it comes from their own family members. Thank you for listening to my family's journey from betrayal to justice. I hope our experience helps someone else recognize warning signs, find courage to investigate suspicious behavior, or simply understand that choosing justice over family loyalty is sometimes the most loving thing you can do. Remember that real family supports your growth and protects your well-being, while toxic people will exploit family relationships for personal gain. Choose your loyalty wisely and never be afraid to stand up for what's right.